The dam gate screamed open like a whale's jaw, and a wall of brown water charged toward my fence line. On the ridge above, Trina Drimple, HOA president and hydrology expert by vibes alone, thrust a clipboard overhead and yelled with unmistakable pride, "This is a sanctioned runoff event." 10 minutes later, her Craftsman split level was bobbing in its own koi pond like a bathtub toy. I'm Cole Ramirez, accidental rancher and enthusiastic introvert. My place sits on 5 quiet acres in Juniper Veil, where the HOA insists every porch flag display muted patriotism, and the newsletter has a section called Demeanor Corner that critiques residents' facial expressions during morning walks. I keep to myself. I raise a few Angus cattle, repair old radios in my workshop, and talk to my dog Yukon, who's a better conversationalist than most of my neighbors. Across the cul-de-sac lives Trina Drimple, an HOA Karen with a laminated lanyard that never leaves her neck and a smile like a subpoena being served at Sunday brunch. She had cited me 14 times in the past year alone. The violations ranged from livestock glances after dusk, which apparently meant my cows were looking at her house too intensely in the evening, to fence posts with aggressive grain pattern, because the wood I used had visible knots that she claimed created a hostile aesthetic. She once left a formal complaint in my mailbox about the unauthorized country music emanating from my barn radio. The song was about trucks. The crown jewel behind our street is Mallard Pond, a pretty reservoir with a small manual dam that the HOA treats like a decorative fountain rather than, actual infrastructure capable of releasing thousands of gallons of water. Spring rains fattened the creek that fed into Mallard Pond. The water level rose steadily, which should have been handled by the county irrigation district, but Trina saw an opportunity. She declared that my cow smell was water-activated, a phrase she repeated at every HOA meeting with the conviction of someone who had just discovered a new law of physics. She began a campaign against me that would have impressed any dictator. She issued fines for pastoral menace, which apparently meant my cows existed too loudly. She sent strongly worded letters about unauthorized rural ambience, complete with underlined passages and highlighted sections. She started a rumor at the book club that I was breeding outlaw steers that didn't comply with neighborhood aesthetic standards. Then she discovered the dam's rusty wheel and decided it was her destiny to control it. In her mind, she had been chosen by the universe to manage the watershed. She staged safety drills with orange cones arranged in geometric patterns and a whistle she blew every 30 seconds. She posted selfies at the dam captioned "Managing Watersheds" with water drop and sparkle emojis, racking up likes from other HOA presidents across the county who apparently thought she was doing important work. She trespassed onto my back easement at least 6 times to measure what she called splash zones with a tape measure and a clipboard. She accused my cattle troughs of hoarding community water, despite the fact that they were connected to my private well. She even taped a notice to my mailbox that read "Controlled release scheduled Saturday, ask me about hydro permissions," as if she was running a city planning department from her living room. I brought my concerns to the HOA board meeting. I explained that the dam was county infrastructure, that she had no training or authority, and that messing with water control structures was actually illegal. The board members looked at each other with the exhausted expressions of people who had long since given up. "Trina's passionate," the board president said with a weak smile, which is HOA code for she's a tornado in a pantsuit and we're too scared to tell her no. One board member added that Trina had done extensive research, by which he meant she had watched 2 YouTube videos about dams and considered herself an expert. Saturday morning arrived with perfect spring weather. At exactly 9 a.m., Trina marched a gaggle of volunteers to the dam like a general leading troops into battle. She wore a high-vis vest that read "Flow Coordinator" in bold reflective letters across the back. She had printed matching T-shirts for her volunteers that said "Flow Team Member" on the front. She even brought a megaphone, which seemed excessive for a group of 8 people, but Trina never did anything halfway. She cranked the wheel on the dam gate without consulting the county water office, the irrigation district, or physics. She didn't even check the weather forecast, which predicted more rain that afternoon. Here's where her plan hit a wall of reality. Problem number 1 was that my property had installed a diversion berm by permit last year. I had hired an actual engineer who did actual calculations. The berm was designed to direct high water around my ranch and back toward the HOA Greenbelt, which happened to be the low point behind Trina's house. The county had approved it because it followed every regulation in the book. Problem number 2 was that Trina had spent $3,000 last summer having sandbags placed around her side yard for aesthetic purposes. She thought they looked rustic and charming. What they actually did was create a lovely bowl that collected water like a bathtub. When the water hit my diversion berm, it did exactly what the engineer had designed it to do. It didn't flood my pasture. Instead, it canonied around the berm, hopped over the greenbelt with impressive velocity, and turned Trina's back patio into a lazy river attraction. Her koi pond overflowed first, sending decorative fish swimming across her lawn. Then her garden gnomes started floating. Her patio furniture became impromptu rafts. She stood in her backyard, water rising past her ankles, and called 911. I could hear her from my porch. She accused me of weaponizing topology, which was a new phrase even by her standards. The first responder arrived within minutes and asked her calmly, "Ma'am, did you open the dam gate?" Her visor cam, because of course she wore a camera on her vest, caught her answering with complete confidence, "For the community." That phrase would haunt her. That phrase aged like milk in the sun. Within an hour, my property looked like a crime scene, except the crime was stupidity. The county sheriff arrived first, followed by 2 officials from the irrigation district wearing waders and expressions of professional disbelief. Then came a fish and wildlife officer who seemed to be enjoying himself more than anyone should at a disaster scene. I invited them to my porch and handed over my permits, organized in a neat folder because I actually follow rules. I showed them the engineer's drawing for the berm, complete with calculations, soil reports, and the county stamp of approval dated 15 months prior. Across the way, Trina was having a different kind of meeting. She brandished a stapled printout titled HOA Hydrology Bylaw Draft, written by, surprise, Trina herself. The document was 12 pages long and included a section about water ownership that would have made a medieval lord proud. The county official blinked 3 times, looked at his partner, then radioed the State Water Resources Board because tampering with a control structure is the kind of thing that gets capitals involved. He used words like unauthorized operation and potential felony, which made Trina's volunteers very nervous. The volunteers, who had been so enthusiastic an hour ago with their matching shirts and orange cones, quietly peeled off their Flow Team stickers and pretended to be concerned hikers who just happened to be passing through. One woman claimed she was bird watching. Another said he was studying native grasses. They scattered like roaches when someone turns on the kitchen light. Insurance adjusters started arriving around noon, summoned by the siren song of liability and property damage. They paced through Trina's submerged living room asking pointed questions and taking photographs of everything. "Who authorized the release?" the lead adjuster asked. Trina pointed at me with an accusatory finger that shook slightly. She claimed I had tricked her with my illegal berm, ignoring the permits I was literally holding. That's when I mentioned my game cam. I had mounted it by the cattails last year to watch for coyotes. The camera had clear audio and high-definition video. The county official asked to see the footage. I pulled it up on my phone right there on the porch. There was Trina, standing at the dam wheel, giving a countdown delivered with the dramatic flair of someone launching a rocket. 3, 2, stewardship, she shouted, then cranked the wheel with both hands. Her volunteers cheered. One person rang a bell. The sheriff watched the footage twice, shook his head, and asked for a copy. Paperwork is the ultimate rip current, and Trina was about to drown in it. Over the next 72 hours, citations and notices arrived at her house like a biblical plague. The state cited her for unauthorized operation of a water control device, which carried potential criminal charges. They added negligent endangerment because her flood had affected 6 other properties downstream. Then came the environmental violations. This was the chef's kiss moment. Her water surge had relocated an entire colony of state-protected chorus frogs from their wetland habitat into her hot tub. The fish and wildlife officer documented this with photographs that would later appear in his agency's training materials as an example of what not to do. The frogs, unbothered by the chaos they had caused, seemed quite happy in the heated water. The sheriff added trespass charges for her repeated unauthorized markings on my easement. Apparently, those orange spray-painted lines and stakes she had placed were considered defacement of property. The HOA's insurance company sent a letter that I later heard about through the neighborhood grapevine. They declined coverage on the basis that Trina had acted outside the scope of her authority, which was insurance speak for we're not paying for this circus. The HOA board, suddenly allergic to her presence and terrified of being sued themselves, held an emergency meeting and voted to suspend her pending investigation. The vote was unanimous. Even her closest ally, a woman named Brenda who usually backed every one of Trina's schemes, voted to remove her. Meanwhile, a local news crew showed up because someone had tipped them off about the flooding. They filmed Trina trying to rescue a patio sectional that was drifting into the greenbelt like a doomed raft. She waded after it in rubber boots, shouting about property rights and community service. The footage would later be viewed 47,000 times on social media with comments like "This is why I'll never join an HOA" and "Someone take the clipboard away from this woman." The authorities decided to arrest her that afternoon. They used polite, backyard cuffs with lots of "ma'am" and "please come with us." When they read her rights, she shouted indignantly, "This is water tyranny. I was protecting the neighborhood." The Fish and Wildlife officer, who had been documenting the chorus frogs all afternoon, replied with perfect deadpan timing that would make a comedian proud, "Ma'am, it's called gravity." Trina took a plea deal that hit like a freight train. The negotiations took 3 weeks and involved 5 different government agencies. When her lawyer finally convinced her that going to trial would be worse, she agreed to the terms. The judge read them aloud in court with a measured tone of someone who had seen everything but was still slightly impressed by the creativity of human stupidity. $23,000 in fines to the state for the water violations. Full restitution to the irrigation district, totaling another $18,000 for emergency repairs and legal fees. 200 hours of community service cataloging invasive reeds along the very creek she had tried to boss around. She would be doing this work under the supervision of the same Fish and Wildlife officer who had documented her chorus frog relocation project. The judge issued a permanent injunction that would follow her for life. She could not approach the dam or any water control structure within 300 feet. She could not touch any valve, wheel, gate, or, and the judge actually said this word, hydraulic appendage. She could not publish, propose, or distribute any bylaws, regulations, or guidelines about water management without a licensed engineer's signature and county approval. The HOA board sent a formal letter the next day confirming her permanent removal from all leadership positions. They also banned her from attending board meetings for 2 years unless she had official business, and even then, she would need to submit a written request 48 hours in advance. When the judge finished reading the terms aloud, Trina's face went through a color transformation that would have impressed a mood ring. Red to white to a shade of purple I didn't know existed in nature. She gripped the defense table so hard her knuckles went bone white. She said in a shaking voice that cracked on every third word, "But I was helping the community. I was trying to prevent flooding. This isn't fair." The judge removed his glasses with the slow, deliberate motion of someone preparing to deliver a truth bomb. He looked directly at her and responded flatly, "Ma'am, you flooded your own house. You relocated protected wildlife. You operated county infrastructure without authority. The court finds that the only thing you prevented was common sense." He banged his gavel once, and Trina's reign as flow coordinator came to an official end.